Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, the 21st of September, part of Earth Laws Month. We're very excited today to have a number of wonderful guest speakers from the Blue Mountains, and I'll introduce them and their session in a moment. Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. I am Michelle Maloney. I'm the convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, and we're really delighted to be hosting folks from the Blue Mountains Arts Collective for our Earth Laws Month. As many of you may know, the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, or AILA, we're a small not-for-profit organisation created originally by some very concerned lawyers, including myself, concerned about the role that the legal system plays in supporting the destruction of the living world. Now, AILA's goals are to help increase the understanding and practical implementation of Earth-centred governance, with a particular focus on shifting our systems of law, economics, education, and ethics. And we do this through many different ways, including working in solidarity with Indigenous colleagues through Future Dreaming. And we've got our Earth Arts program, because we believe very strongly that the human spirit and creativity is absolutely required for the kinds of governance and systems change we need right now to look after the Earth community. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the traditional lands of the Yagara people here in the very beautiful North Brisbane. I do feel quite honoured to live in such a beautiful part of the world, and I I share this place with many beautiful plants and animals, and most folks who know me know I'm slightly obsessed with blue-banded bees. So I'd like to acknowledge elders past, present, and the youth and young people and others emerging as leaders now. And I'd also like to acknowledge the remarkable civilisational culture that has cared for country and cared for kin since time immemorial. And as I always say, AILA and our sister organisations, Future Dreaming and the New Economy Network, are very committed to playing a part in the decolonising of our hearts and minds, so that the remnants of the British Empire on this continent can be moved aside gently as we engage fully with being folks of this continent and this place. So the only other thing I'll do is give a quick plug for the rest of the program for Earth Laws Month. I might ask one of my colleagues, James Lee, who's online at the moment, to pop into the chat where you can find the program for lots of wonderful events. Tonight we have Tim Hollow talking about his excellent book, Living Democracy. Tomorrow we've got a really excellent talk with some friends from the US and Canada about ecological law and reframing the paradigm of governance. We've got so many other cool things, but I shan't go on. What I'd like to do now is introduce the very wonderful, absolute powerhouse of energy, Barbara Lepani, to talk us through what's going to happen in our session today. And I'll be here to assist and play some of the recorded talks whenever you need me, Barbara, but over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Michelle. And to start with, I'd like to acknowledge that we're all talking to you here from the land of the Gundungurra and Darug people of the Blue Mountains, and of course the Wiradjuri people to the west where Henrik lives. So the Regenesis Project is something that I began actually inspired by the work of Australian Earth Laws Alliance and the work of Michelle, because I've long been conscious of the need to tell a different story about how we live on the earth than the one that's driven us to the climate and ecological crisis that we now face. By way of background, I married into Trobriand Island culture of Papua New Guinea. I'm a long-term student of Tibetan Buddhism, and I spent a year working with the Aboriginal elder Bob Randall, which introduced me to the complexities and knowledge system of Australia's Aboriginal culture. So all of these things inform the way I think about Regenesis. So what I'd like to do is now share my screen with you. I've got a little slideshow that I can share with you. But by way of background, I'm now the president of the Blue Mountains Creative Arts Network, and we're a kind of a small collective of artists and creatives of all sorts who try to come together and put on events and provoke different ways of thinking and celebrate art. And in this, we're completely inspired by the role of the arts in the songline tradition that have kept First Nations knowledge systems alive here for many, many thousands of generations. So given the role the arts played in First Nations knowledge systems, I'd like to think that the arts can play a similar role now as we take on the task of telling a story that shapes our future that's different from the past. So let me share my screen with you now. There we go. So this is the logo that we presented for the Regenesis Collective, which is a little project within Blue Mountains Creative Arts Network that runs it. And you'll see here, we use the symbol of the heart because, as we've now understood, facts are not enough to shift people's thinking and practice. It has to come deep in the heart, and we have to make a very strong emotional connection to how we think about the future. And we have to look at both what's on the surface, which is all this talk about renewable energies, but also what lies beneath the surface, which is not just what's under the ground and the soil that we in our feet, but also the deep stories of our culture that have shaped our thinking. So in acknowledging the Nara, the country of the Blue Mountains, we can see here, this is Auntie Sharon Hall talking about what Nara or what country actually means to First Nations people. And here we see that it takes in everything within the physical, cultural, and spiritual landscape. So country is not landscape. It's landforms, it's water, it's trees, rocks, plants, and animals, but it's also stories and special places. It's cultural practice, kinship, songs, stories, and art, as well as the spiritual beings. So, and these are all from the past, the present, and the future. So basically, to understand the Aboriginal relationship to country is to rethink the way we live with nature as, as a completely animated landscape, where every part of creation has its own voice and speaks in its own language. And we might ask, well, how do we non-First Nations people learn how to listen to those voices? And I suppose drawing on my own Buddhist practice, but also the time I spent with Bob Randall on country, it means opening up the intuitive side of your mind, that silent sensing or feeling aspect of mind that's not about language. Because once we move into language, we start to trap it into the concepts of particular cultures. If you come back from language and you rest in a place where your mind is open and spacious and you're just sensing things, you have a chance of tuning in to the vibrant nature of the world around us. So our panel that are going to be talking to you today, there's me, you see. The next person you'll hear from is Janelle Randall Court, and she's a Bundjalung woman who lives here in the Blue Mountains. And I've been working with her on a project called Reimagine, which is a waste to art project. Then Henrik, that you'll meet soon. And then there's Sean O'Keefe, who's a local filmmaker and artist. And finally, Melissa Chambers. Then one of the people that Janelle worked very closely with on her Reimagine project of rethinking the nature of waste on country is Auntie Carol Cooper. And in Janelle's pre-recorded piece, you'll hear from Auntie Carol about her incredible sadness as she looks at the way people dump rubbish on country. And then I would like to connect you to a statement from the Blue Mountain City Council, who've got a very strong project here called the Planetary Health Initiative, but they've recently signed a document which is like a commitment pledge to the First Nations people of this country called Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow, and they've translated into Gundungurra and Darug language. And in one of the statements they make there that I thought was worth sharing is, despite the massive adversity of colonisation, the traditional owners of the Blue Mountains, like so many First Nations community, is one of heroic resistance, survival, reawakening and reclamation of a rich inheritance, and then of an unbroken and timeless connection to country. And this is what they're trying to share with us through the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and which hopefully under our new government and their commitment to the voice, the whole of Australia will begin to be able to embrace. So this is an image actually from Henrik. The Earth Speaks Back. As we know, in the Blue Mountains in 2019 to 2020, the mega fire known as the Gosper Fire raged through the Blue Mountains. and it came right to the balcony of Henrik's house, and he'll talk to you about that. But we've all understood with the floods and fires that climate change is on our doorstep. It's not in the future, it's here now, and the earth is speaking back to us through its own voice. So what are we seeing now around the world in geostrategic competition and all of the wars and conflicts that are breaking out is the unraveling of the old order. And this is an image, of course, of the White House in Washington falling apart. And I like to think that no matter how solid the current world order is, with all the rich and their private planes and the strength of those institutions of global capitalism, in the cracks of this system, new green shoots are growing. Now, in order to understand how we all got it so wrong, I try to understand what are the deep stories that have influenced Western culture, which of course we've exported to the world through imperialism, colonization, and now global capitalism. And this image here is really like drawing on the legacy of the Old Testament, the story of Genesis, verse 1.26, where it said that God made man in his own image and gave him dominion over the earth and all its life forms. Now, although some eco-spiritual Christians today say that this call of dominion was one of stewardship, the reality is, if we look at the way in which Christianity has intertwined with imperialism and capitalism, it was interpreted as that the only part of the creation that had a soul or had a mind was human beings, and particularly men, and the rest of nature was brute and insensitive, and therefore exploitation by human genius. And that is what shaped Western culture through the scientific revolution and the development of a mechanistic understanding of the nature of the world in Newton's Principia Mathematica. And then that rolled on through the industrial revolutions, and we've had various ways of technological innovation since. I have to confess that I was once a technological optimist, because I earned my living as a sociologist of technological innovation. But I now see that underlying all of that innovation is this old story of dominion and exploitation. And I would like to acknowledge the work of Aboriginal elder, Dr. Mary Graham from Queensland, who very neatly sums up the difference between what she calls extractivist logic and relationist logic. So what I think we're moving now is we're trying to go from the extractivist logic of global capitalism and all the institutions that wrap around it to a new logic of relationism, which I'm calling Regenesis, rethinking the legacy of Genesis. So this is the mechanistic mind, and we all are familiar with people comparing the mind to a computer, a sort of wet computer, thinking of mind as only the brain, the physical organ. And I like to think that we can also draw on the metaphor of cancer to understand this, that our traditional approach to dealing with cancer was to have a war on cancer. And we used all sorts of traditional treatments, which produced massive side effects and had very low level of efficacy in post-treatment protection. And I think that's the nature of the current tendency to think we can solve the climate and ecological crisis by Australia becoming a renewable energy superpower and keeping all the consumer-based economics in place. So one of the things we've done up here in retelling the Regenesis story is that we work with local writers to produce a little anthology. And you'll hear from Melissa later, because she won the prize for the best artworks for this anthology. And now I'd like to acknowledge the work of Green Shoots, which is the project that Michelle Maloney and her colleagues have been developing. And they're now working in Lithgow, which is very close to the Blue Mountains. And the thing I loved about their work was step one is thinking differently. And thinking differently is what I call regenesis. And in doing that, it's not like we're going back to old Aboriginal culture or First Nations culture. what we're paying attention to is the logic and genius and wisdom that's embedded in their knowledge system as a way to live sustainably with a world that is thoroughly animated, where we humans realize that we're just one animal amongst many, and that we have become a very predatory species. So we then have to say, well, how do we reconnect with what matters? Instead of all of this palaver we hear about with influencers and social media and the narcissism that it produces and the fashion industry, and now the 2 weeks glorification of the British Empire that we've had to sit through with the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II. So instead, what we have to do now is focus on how do we build community at the local level, and then these communities stitch together around the world, sharing a similar story, because we're co-creating together alternatives across economy, society, and habitat. And this is the incredibly important work that Michelle and her colleagues have been doing. And as well as she said, we have to transform law and the governance structures and institutional arrangements that have held everything in place. So what I'd like us to do now is think about how then do we weave this ancient law of Australia. And as we know, when First Nations people talk about law, or in Central Australia, they call it jerkapa, what they mean is the immutable laws of total ecological systems awareness. That's why it's always spelt law in capital letters, and it cannot be disobeyed because it's the nature of the world. It's not the Western legal system that has imprisoned people and caused such injustice to so many. It's the law of ecology. It's the law of creation. So how do we now weave that together with modern science and the insights of the humanities in Western scholarship? So one of the people who tried to do this in his own way was Uncle Bob Randall. And he came up with the idea of Kanyini. And he said, basically, there are 4 principles you weave together. The law of total systems awareness, the jerkapa, which has different names in different First Knowledge cultures, Nara. And he said what Nara means is this strong sense of belonging with country. As Aboriginal people say, we don't own country, country owns us. We are country, country is us. Then Bob talked about the idea of Karunpa, which is love, spirit, and soul, which is that heart connection that I have in the logo of the Regenesis Collective, that we have to tap in to this deep sense of spiritual connection to one another and to the world around us. And finally, Bob talked about Walitja, family connectedness. As we know, the way in which First Nations people have survived colonization is through the strength of their family connectedness. And now we have to, not all families are good. There are many families that have terrible toxic relationships. So, but supporting families and making families healthy is part of what Regenesis is all about. So then I looked at cancer and what's happening now in the world of science. And cancer treatment now has moved on to the idea of immunotherapy. And that's where you begin to work with nature to cure the problem. Where you work with the nature's own, so here a person's own immune system is what you work with in order to work with the cancerous cell to turn it healthy. And I like to think, Michelle, that your work with Green Prints is a form of immunotherapy for the ills of our ecological system, because if you look down there, it has very little side effects and it has very good post-treatment protection. So I think we can, that as science is learning from nature, we can begin to take those aspects of science that are plugged into total systems ecological awareness and move that metaphor across all of our socioeconomic systems. So I'd like to leave with a few questions. How can then we as artists and people working in the arts sector tell this, what I call a new/ancient story of relationist logic through everything that we do, through our art, through our music, through our songs? How can we all become earthlings in a previous session that we did with Michelle, we were looking for a word that wasn't Indigenous or non-Indigenous, but what do we share together? And I thought this idea, yes, let's think of ourselves as earthlings. It was a very nice word because we can come together around that. And how do we tell this story in a way that engages all of our community? How do we spread the tentacles of this story out in lots of different mediums and different ways so that it begins to seep into the consciousness of our community? So thanks for that. So I'll now hand over to Michelle to introduce us all to Janelle.
Thank you so much, Barbara. And thank you for mentioning our work on green prints. We're always grateful when people like what we do and mention what we do. So I'm going to now take over the screen. All right. Barbara, if you could put your thumbs up when you hear this, that would be grand. And then I'll enlarge the screen.
It's not my country, but it's where I live. It's where the sisters stand watching over the valley. It's here my story begins. This is an ancient place, cared for by Aboriginal people for thousands of years. Today, Gundungurra and Darug people continue to care for their ancestral homelands. Gundungurra and Darug country. I want to take you there. When we look out over these valleys, we're reminded of the ancestors, how they lived on this country, and the legacy they left us with. Thousands of years of occupation, and yet to look at this place, you'd assume that no one had ever been here. It's a living, breathing example of the way our people lived on this earth. The Blue Mountains is now a World Heritage listed site. It's over 1 million hectares of preserved landscape. There are 6 Aboriginal language groups within that World Heritage area, and it's testament to their care and responsibility that we now have a World Heritage area, let alone a national park. It's when I look around and I see how beautiful this place is, I know that it's because of those ancestors and the traditional people who continue to care for their country.
Well, my name's Carol Cooper and we're in Darug and Gundungurra country in the beautiful Blue Mountains. As far as I'm concerned, the best place on earth. It's an amazing place, this. And what we're discussing today, it breaks my heart. But having said that, please let me thank you very much for bringing it to our attention. It's an amazing, the rubbish that people will just chuck over there. It's not just paper and cups. It's whatever they can get their hands on. And there's signposts, and there's garbage bins, the big green garbage bins. We've never considered looking over and down Echo Point. We've always looked straight out and around. We've never looked down. And by not looking down, we've missed what you have found and brought to our attention. And it's amazing how they can do that. Just go around destroying property like that and chucking it over Echo Point. Yeah, that's our place. We've kept the place clean for thousands and thousands of years, And now in this time, we've got people that don't care. And it makes it really hard for us to cope with.
Hi Janelle, great to see you here. Now,
you.
what I'd like to talk to you about is the way in which the project you've been doing with me, the Reimagine Project,
Yep.
how that is inspired by your whole commitment to caring for country as a Bundjalung Yagal woman who lives here in the Blue Mountains.
Oh goodness, where do I start? You know, I think caring for country is so embedded in our culture and in our people and our stories, and it really is about our responsibility, really, at the end of the day. And it shows in you know, you go to some of the most beautiful and remote places in this country of ours, and what you're actually looking at is the remnants of you know, our people caring for country over hundreds and thousands of years. And yeah, things are different now. The materials that we use are very different. You know, useful things like glass and plastic and steel. These are things that have changed and evolved over time. And they're now part of our life as Aboriginal people as well. So I guess, you know, our responsibility is even greater now. And so that passion stays really within me. And, you know, I'm lucky and I'm really happy that I'm seeing some changes. And that's through being able to, you know, express my concerns through the arts. And, you know, being part of this project with you has been fabulous, because it's just another layer. What's really important about this Reimagine project is that we're supporting the healing of community after the fires. So with that, it's even a deeper kind of sense of, you know, responsibility, because we're looking after each other as people who have suffered, you know, great trauma, some people, through those fires.
Yeah.
So that, you know, that coming together also, and being creative, and then looking at other issues like landfill and waste, it's just been wonderful.
And tell us about the bin stickers that you did for Penrith City Council.
That's probably my most exciting thing that's happening very shortly, actually. So this year we had the rains down in Penrith when we were supposed to be celebrating our NAIDOC week, and we had a big community event planned, but because of the rains it got postponed. And Penrith City Council, I approached them about you know, what I would like to see happen at that event, because lots of Aboriginal people and community were invited to talk about what they would like to see at this event. And I just think it's time that, you know, we all Aboriginal people think about how we hold events, and you know, from what we eat off to where our rubbish is going to go, and the collectible things that we take home, you know, what are they made of? Are they, you know, that those sort of things sort of stick in my head, and I like to talk about it and see if it's a possibility. And so as an artist, yeah, I've been working on my bin labels, beautiful decorative labels that go on wheelie bins. And while we can't actually have them on our private wheelie bins in the Blue Mountains and Western Sydney, I've got the opportunity to reach out and talk to people that are, you know, events. So we could have my bin stickers displayed to sort of highlight, you know, where your rubbish should go. You know, basically encourage people to come over and look at the bins and look at the beautiful artwork, but then, yeah, start to develop a more sort of stronger relationship with where their rubbish is going, particularly at events, because it's so disturbing, you know, watching, you know, massive events, even around the world, where hundreds and thousands of people congregate, and when they leave, just to see how much rubbish is left behind. Well, I think, you know, we can change that. Yeah. You know, but in a creative way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how has this sort of engagement with art and creativity nourished you in your own life's journey?
Oh, look, I think, you know, I've spent a lot of time out at landfill, and that's my favourite place. Always has been, you know. It was just always a weekend, you know, thing to do. And of course, you know, I've raised my daughter, who's now 30, taking her out to landfill, nieces, nephews, sister, you know, the whole family. And, you know, I, like generations of people who have gone to landfill, you know, over many, many years, what we've realised is just that the wasted resources, you know, that end up. And to this day, you know, in remote tips, country tips, it's phenomenal. And I guess, you know, it's great to find something fabulous and bring it home and use it yourself, or sell it, or, you know, do it up and get creative with it. But it really is, it's kind of like an archaeological dig when you go to a tip, because there's so many stories, you know, and so much history in landfill, but at the same time, it's so disturbing. And I guess for me, what's nourished me is that, you know, with my history of art, you know, the arts and stuff, I've been able to meld the two and develop fabulous projects, you know, that really get people thinking. And that's what it's about. I've never really wanted to, you know, point the finger at people or society and say, you know, you're doing it wrong and we should be doing it better. But, you know, let's look at it. Let's get creative and then, you know, change our behaviours.
Yeah.
And that's, I speak for myself too. So, yeah, it's about teaching myself.
All part two of that reuse, recycle, upcycle. So the end of fast fashion, the end of waste, and a much more conscious celebration of how we can take what we've got and extend its use and rework it using our imagination and working together. So yes,
absolutely.
Thank you. And it's just been such a pleasure working with you on the Reimagine project. And we've got one final workshop to do, which is we're going to take a whole bunch of creatives together. And we're going to say, okay, now let's co-create our own journey of Regenesis. So looking forward to that,
Looking forward to the future. You know, it's a bright future.
Thank you, Janelle.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Barbara and Janelle. Now, Barbara, did you want to introduce our next speaker, or are you happy for me to just roll on? Because I know Henrik is next.
Yeah, so Henrik's someone that I've known for many years, since I first came to live up here in the Blue Mountains. And he lives over at Dargan on the edge of the Monkey Creek Escarpment. He's a sculptor whose work I really love. And I think Henrik can tell you himself about the kind of environment he lives and works in and how that informs his sculpture and what it's like to live in such a wild and beautiful place as the Monkey Creek Escarpment. So over to you, Henrik. So make sure you unmute your thing now. Henrik's new to all of this.
He's doing very well. The next challenge is sharing screen.
Yeah, that's...
Am I on?
Yes, can you hear us, Henrik? We can hear you.
Yeah, perfectly okay.
Did you?
Thank you, Barbara. Firstly, quick sort of introduction of myself. Polish migrant with 40 years of Australian citizenship behind me. As Barbara mentioned, living on the edge of escarpment in Dargan on 10 acres, overlooking a beautiful valley when Monkey Creek actually starts. Then the waters drain to Kangaroo Creek, Lett River, and Cox's River. It's a terrain full of water, caves, and pagodas. I know of at least 5 caves within roughly 2-kilometer radius from my place. Beautiful places. In one of them, remnants of, well, they certainly would have been used by Aborigines as shelter. In one of them, just recently, one of the ashes piles got carbon tested for over 10,000 years. So that's the context where I am. Of course, the nature is enormous influence on in my practice. I used to do public art for last 25, 30 years. That involves running workshops with children and sometimes adults, I would just go down into my valley and collect bark, sticks, leaves, and that would be the main material to be used by participants of the workshops. Barbara talks about nature in all its forms speaking to us. I don't see myself as an extremely spiritual person, certainly not a tree hugger. I actually have got a big confession to make. When I came to this country in the first year, I used to be Polish teacher in Poland. When you come here, well, who needs Polish teachers? So I had to make a living somehow. Ended up in Rockhampton, in the forests, clearing land for pastures. And, you know, silly 22 years old, it hasn't crossed my mind that there might be something wrong with that sort of behavior. We used to have a container of poison on a belt, and axe in one hand. You make 5 cuts in the tree, inject the poison, and within literally 2 hours, 100 meters tall blue gums, glorious trees, would be shedding leaves and dying. But that was a long time ago. Now nature sort of speaks to me. Water, wind, stone, rustling plants. Funnily enough, oceans definitely don't speak to me, perhaps because I've got a shark phobia. When I go in the water ankle deep, that's all I can think, hammerheads and stuff like that. It gets worse. I've got a flight phobia now because if the plane goes down, I will end up in the water. Not my favorite environment. But anyway, where I'm heading. I must tell you what has happened to me about 25 years ago when we moved into that place on the escarpment where I am now. Obviously, I wanted to explore and started roaming on the land around pagodas. And at one day, I came to a point between 2 pagodas where there was a little passage, slightly curved, so you couldn't see what actually was further on. Immediately, what came to my mind, remember picnic under hanging rock, when the girls disappear in that passage, never to be seen again. On top of that, I swear, I heard some incredible, was it music? Was it noise? It was like slightly like didgeridoo humming. And that totally stopped me in my tracks. Like it was seriously, seriously scary. Do I go any further? Do I enter the passage? Do I explore the land further? And I told myself, yes, I will. I'm here not to hurt this land. I'm here to protect it and care for this land, as Aborigines have done through thousands and thousands of years, of course. But in the recent history, very recent history, because what's 200 years, something went wrong. That's something I don't quite understand. Well, there are facts. Colonizers have taken the country, the whole land over and simply raped it. But why? It's as if we slowly but surely deprived ourselves from sustainable future. But why? Was European farming so bad? I tell you a quick story about my grandfather's life, who was a farmer in Poland, considerably large farm in Poland. I remember the property. There was the house, of course, a number of outbuildings, cows, pigs, horses, sheep. But in the center of that property, sort of 10 meters by 10 meters, there was enormous pit where the whole family would, throw manure in, straw, whatever green matter they had. And that material would sort of cook in this pit. And there were channels draining the water into a separate pit, smaller pit, where this beautiful, probably the healthiest fertilizer on the planet was collected. And then we would get a wagon and spread it over the lands. There was really conscious and careful rotation of the land, changing pastures and stuff like that. It's just like regenerative farming starting to happen in Australia. I recently listened to an interview with a farmer and a writer who said that his father started that type of farming 40 years ago and was simply seen as a lunatic. It's not the case anymore, thanks God, but it took a while. So where are we now? In reality, I think in big trouble. And, Elon Musk's ravings about colonizing Moon and Mars or whole universe will not help at all. It's actually harmful because he doesn't realize that we humans belong with the soil, with the land. In a recent Q&A panel discussion, Simon Langstaff pointed out, as always, very wisely, that only the sharing of the land, the planet, between all of us can unite us. By sharing the knowledge about the land, we can overcome adversity. To cure the cancer of the land, only sharing of it is the answer. On another topic now, supposedly I'm an artist. I have 2 beautiful workshops on my property. Now I should call them studios because artists have got studios, not workshops. And I want to call myself an artist. Plus with my partner, Maren, we run a commercial gallery next door to our place, which is very handy. But both places are right on the edge of escarpment. It is exciting, but as we all know, it can be dangerous. Both 2013 and 2019 fires came to our doorstep. We and building survived. 25 houses in Dargan got burned down completely. We had interesting interactions with people who have lost their places. What really amazed me, they were grieving, but they were very happy for us. Like it was palpable that they were really, really happy for us that we survived. One thing I'd like to point out that there was enormous difference in ferocity of fire between 2013 and 2019. The very recent fire was far, far more dangerous and destructive. There are whole swathes of mountain ash forest that simply we will not recover. One of the sculptures that is on the slideshow, I called it Bananas in Pyjamas. Barbara, in her wisdom, renamed it as Regenesis, which is quite appropriate. I like it. Funnily enough, like to talk about the ferocity still, at my neighbor's property, there was a container with lots of white goods and stuff, a fair bit of metal as well. And when we forced the door open, the container actually survived, but when we forced the door open, there was about 40 centimeters of ash at the bottom on the ground. Nothing else, just ash, which means everything melted down and disappeared. Steel melts at 1600 degrees Celsius. So that might give you the idea of how deadly that fire was. Being an artist, one is trying to make sense of what is happening, of presence and how we deal with stuff. Immediately after the fires, I started collecting charred trunks and actually did quite well with it. I sold quite a few, most of them to people who got burned down. Actually, on the second day after the fire, as you all probably have seen on TV footage, all these power poles being burned down and falling down. I started collecting these beautiful ceramic insulators. Got quite a lot now. You know, they are compromised in terms of electricity, but they make beautiful sculptures. So I'll be using them for next 10 years. No, another thing, plenty of it. People started bringing me molten car parts, aluminum car parts, that while the melting process was happening, would create beautiful, beautiful shapes. One of my neighbors renamed the house, the property, and the new house burned down. And I made signage for them with the name and with the insulators. Years ago, Dargan was a place for, you know, loners and extravagant people.
Excuse me, Henrik.
Yeah.
We're running out of time now. Can you switch to
I'm done.
slideshow?
I'm done.
Were you going to share some slides?
So go to share screen, Merrin.
Yep.
That's the Regenesis, or Bananas in Pajamas. That's my workshop, doing some laser cutting, plasma cutting, turning a seagull in a way on a stick. Prayer wheels. Actually, these are the insulators I mentioned, and you on this sculpture you can actually turn the wheels as if in a temple. Soaring, bit of, I love abstract sculpture, and just the elements here really sort of got me going. What's this one called?
Streaming.
Streaming. Bit of driftwood that I had for 25 years and nearly burned in the fire for 100 times, but then something happened to it. Darter drying wings. That's actually outside our gallery on the edge of escarpment. Birds galore invading, Hitchcock invading my workshop.
They are wonderful.
And the last one, I think, taking off. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing, Henrik.
Thanks.
Just wonderful. All right. And so, Barbara, I'll now share the video from Sean.
For me personally, the nothing is about obviously my own life. It's a very reflective work. It incorporates a lot of archival footage, that is to say videos and still images that were not produced to be a film. They were in some cases personal archive, family photos, family videos, home movies, that sort of thing, combined with very specific film sequences. And the title comes from the Michael Ender film, I was going to say Michael Ender film, but it is in fact the Michael Ender book, The Never-Ending Story. And I mentioned the film there kind of indirectly and directly there because I saw the film before I read the book. And my impression of the nothing, the way it was communicated in the film, is in fact very different to the way that the book represents this concept of the nothing. Possibly because it was a children's film and possibly that it was aiming for a North American market. It attempted to, I guess, soften or, I guess, redirect what the author, I think, was really intending with that idea. His idea is much more sinister, much darker, and of course much more of a metaphor. So I thought I might start by just reading the section of the book that really struck me, and at which point I realised that what I was reading and my experiences, which had been largely based on the film, suddenly were very different. And I think you'll find that it does pertain to what's being discussed at the conference, in particular our relationship with the environment, but certainly as is kind of my understanding of the focus of this conference, a reframing of the way we inherently see a human occupation of the planet and our relationship with the environment. The nothing is spreading, groaned the first. It's growing and growing. There's more of it every day, if it's possible to speak of more nothing. All the others fled from the howling forest in time, but we didn't want to leave our home. The nothing caught us in our sleep, and this is what it did to us. Is it very painful? Atreyu asked. No, said the second bark troll, the one with the hole in his chest. You don't feel a thing. There's just something missing. And once it gets hold of you, something more is missing every day. And soon there won't be anything left of us. So that passage of writing really was the stimulation for me to produce the film. And what I was really interested in was this very pervasive sense of nothing. It's a nihilistic sense of things ending, which has certainly been very pervasive in the last couple of years. I think some might very convincingly argue that the sort of anxieties and the sort of, I guess, pessimism associated with certainly COVID and the environmental catastrophes that have been amplified in the last few years, with special reference to bushfire, which is the one that's certainly impacted where I live the most, but also flooding. I think what it did, of course, was it just kind of made us more attunely aware of things that have been happening for ages. And it's very much this sense of not being able to be in any kind of denial or even, I mean, when I say denial, I'm not talking about a refusal of acceptance. I think it's very rare now that you do still meet people that have that don't accept global climate change. But it is understandable that in the course of day-to-day living, people will block that out. You might acknowledge it in the morning and then try and not to think about it throughout the course of the day. And what happened in the last couple of years was that there was really no escape. There was no relief from this constant awareness that things were literally, physically, the environment around us was shifting and being affected, and quite in a quite self-centered way, because it impacted on our own quality of life directly. And I guess that sense of pessimism around that constant sense of anxiety also made me think about, as what I read into Michael Ender, is this idea of more than just bad things are happening and it's, we feel helpless and powerless about it, but actually there's a sense of an undoing happening. And I began to reflect a little bit on what exactly I thought that was. Is it as simple as an undoing of the human existence? Or is there a kind of a broader philosophical idea about things being undone? I'm not attempting to provide answers to those questions. That's not something I think is my role, and I'd feel completely inadequate and unqualified to make any sort of conclusive answers to anything. It was more about proposing questions in a sort of metaphorical way that might get you to think about things like that. And to be honest, the whole work itself is really my own. It's for myself. And so there are a lot of very personal images in there that for me are very resonant and do reflect the changes of a period of time that is equal to the time that Cement has been running as an arts festival. Tied into this idea of things dissipating and dispersing and breaking down is also a kind of a layman's relationship with some physics ideas. One of them is Brownian Motion, which is a system by which particles move. I don't want to do a physics lesson because I'm, again, not very qualified to do it. But essentially, it's a very interesting idea. It contributed to, in my reading, it contributed to Albert Einstein's work on the theory of relativity. In terms of a day-to-day relationship, it's the system by which the motion of particles, particularly smoke particles, the way that they dissipate. So it sort of describes those. And interestingly, coincidentally, it's the same principle that defines how particles of disease like COVID dissipate or disperse, which, as you go down the wormhole of that, has a lot to do with things like how an N95 mask works. You can breathe through the mask, air can get in, but it doesn't let the particles of COVID in. And why does it do that? Who knew? This is to do with Brownian motion. So these masks are designed to be able to block or capture these particles of COVID before they get into your mouth or to your body. So there was a lot of little synchronicitous sort of relationships between Brownian motion and smoke and disease, and of course the environment, and which I saw as just being, again, sort of very interconnected with this idea of what was going on at the now, and my place or relationship to those things in it. So in the film there's a lot of references to particular motion, lots of old sort of science films, instructional film sections. There's also references to astronomy. There you go, there's Brownian motion. I've got a moth flying past me. So there's a lot of science in there, and I guess I'm also, without drawing too long a bow, talking a little bit about the physical properties of the scientific study of what's affecting the environment. So I guess the best thing to do, I'm always a bit uncomfortable talking about these films because I think it's better to just watch them and draw your own conclusions and hopefully enjoy the experience, and hopefully it's engaging enough that you'll sit through it. I guess one of the reasons I'm here and that I'm speaking is that I also produced another film called Timescapes with Barbara Lepani and Brad Dietrich, which was exhibited as part of another exhibition, and it dealt directly with the consequences and impacts of environmental catastrophes such as bushfires. This is quite an extraordinary work. I did a visual montage of the post-bushfire landscape out near Clarence, and Barbara and Brad interviewed a number of people who were directly involved in both RFS work and or residents of those areas, and were in some cases very tragically impacted by those events. And although they're very different works, they have a very different approach. The Nothing's very kind of metaphorical. Timescapes is a very, very direct documentary. I think they're both exploring similar ideas. And I guess, I'll finish on this, that what The Nothing kind of, without giving away the ending, really explores is that the consequences of much of our action we see often in terms of our own existence, not so we do something about it when humans might be affected, as opposed to a kind of a broader idea that looking after the planet for the planet's sake, as opposed to just to ensure our own survival, and ideally, that we can keep surviving living the same way. If we can find a solution to climate change that involves us not compromising our lifestyles, or we can keep living in the kind of same kind of focused approach that ultimately caused all that. So as opposed to really biting the bullet and accepting that the way that we live and the way that we're thinking is contributing, and that we have to really shift that, which is one of the reasons why I was interested in this conference and what is being explored there. Barbara wanted me to talk about my Facebook post, which talked about hope. And I've realised I'm run out of time, so I won't really expand on that too much, other than ultimately, although The Nothing is quite a dark film in some ways, it does seem to go towards a very nihilistic approach. The end of the film, I hope, does give a sense of hope, if not necessarily one that is a comfortable one, without expanding on what that means without seeing the film. Anyway, I hope I haven't waffled off too long. I hope the conference goes really well, and my apologies for not being there live. But I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that it's great and that you enjoy the film. Thanks very much.
Okay, well, that was a fascinating talk. And I wonder, Barbara, do we have the links for the short films that he mentioned? And I apologise if I've already seen them. It's been a busy week. You're on mute, Barbara.
I think Sean sent them to James for the Earth Art virtual exhibition.
Okay, we might talk about them at the end then. Yeah, once Melissa's finished, we might show folks where the virtual gallery is and how to find some of those things. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And so now, Melissa, if you're happy to share with us, and what I will do, I will take Barbara, Henrik, and myself off, because people were sharing slides. It didn't matter that we were spotlighted, but I think everyone needs a bit of a break from being stared at. So over to you, Melissa. Thank you so much for sharing with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute delight and surprise. I do actually just need to, scroll back to the beginning of my...
Melissa, sorry to interrupt. Your sound is a little coming and going. I don't know if you need to be closer or if you've got a headphones or...
I appreciate you saying that.
Could be your internet too.
Okay, so You're seeing my screen now? Is that on?
Yes, we can see one big image on the right and then the little ones on the left. So I think, yep, there you go.
I'm Melissa. I'm fortunate to be on Darug land in the Lower Blue Mountains. I'm a hobby visual artist and an amateur poet, and that's led me to be here today. I have a passion for permaculture and planetary health, and in particular, food sovereignty.
Sorry, Melissa, can you just lean forward and stay? Because yeah, I'm really sorry. The sound's not good for those of us with ears that aren't as young as they can be. Thank you very much, love.
No problems. So I have a passion for permaculture and planetary health, and in particular, food sovereignty. So a strong emphasis on clean water, air, and even more so, healthy living soil and healthy communities. So what Regenesis means to me, when I saw the invitation from Rosie Ravelston Books to contribute to a collection of artworks, poems, and stories, I was really excited because it sort of just invoked my appetite, if you'd say, for what I know about regenerative agriculture and permaculture, and as well as being excited by the people care aspect of it being a collection rather than a competition, not just a competition to see who wins, but the collective nature with the output and the outcome of a collation of stories from our local area, which I just thought was a brilliant way to bring community together to work towards a common goal and a common theme, which is, yeah, just really beautiful. So in the theme of the sort of ancient teaching aspect and Indigenous cultures, looking after the soil, and this quote speaks to me about traditional agriculture rather than our current day agriculture and our need to get back to that. And viewing it as a mother and that sort of personal relationship with the land that you see throughout all ancient cultures. And I can't help but think it's been forgotten sometimes. And hence Regenesis is revisiting that, but then also sort of writing a new story, which I find thoroughly inspiring. So the intersection of art and planetary health to me is just amazing. It seems so fitting to be able to artistically express the need of planetary health with the connection between spirit and earth that really resonates with me, and the balance between knowing that life as an individual is impermanent, but the Mother Earth needs to be respected and preserved for all future generations, and for all species to thrive. Humans generally are too busy doing and so often not being. So, just the concept of we're human beings, not human doings. But having said that, we need to take action. Now really is the time for action. And art is one of those ways to retell stories. And art by nature is the process of not only reflecting and expressing what has been, but also questioning the difference between what is and what could be. A picture paints 1,000 words, but those words don't necessarily carry the same meaning for everybody. So the context and where people are coming from really is everything. But what art can do is aesthetically please, or it can provoke. It can work in either direction to really question motives and message, as well as being a means to start conversations, to really question, what's ethically motivating you, what's happening with your moral compass, and then similarly talking and discussing with other people in groups, what's motivating them. Are we on the same page? What is our direction forward? I really think starting with the self is that we can bring real truth then to groups and communities, and the world. Like Barbara said before, it's like a big patchwork quilt of local communities. And that's a lovely way to think of it. Not everybody's beliefs are going to be exactly the same. So through through this process of checking in all of the time, we can work towards designing a bright future in all areas. I've always been fascinated by artworks, particularly surreal, and where there's ambiguity and metaphors of imagery presented between the relationship between humans and nature itself. From the aesthetics to the serious business of reading landscapes, which is what we learn in permaculture, is actually learning the patterns of the land and working with nature rather than against it. I've had the very unique opportunity to be able to work with Blue Mountains Planetary Health Initiative, where Blue Mountains Council have really taken quite a unique stance and a leadership role in creating planetary health initiatives. One of the actions that Blue Mountains Council has done is purchasing the former Katoomba Golf Clubhouse with a view to establishing Planetary Health Leadership Centre, which Shell sits on the advisory committee of, along with a number of other people in our local community. The council have been exploring with community options for future use of the extraordinary site through a master planning process. And at the same time, the council has been developing a 3-year program developing with the community to trial the first planetary health pluriversity. The goal is to bring together the wisdom of First Nations, academic research, citizen science, and both council and community initiatives, so that we can learn from many voices and in many ways, and learn to restore planetary health together. It actually makes me think the lovely talk that there was yesterday on the oceans, and just adjoining that to something that really resonated with me from the teacher training course that I had the opportunity to be a part of. This is our group here on the left. Henrik mentions that the ocean doesn't speak to him as much as the wind and the trees and the rocks and the mountains. Whereas I remember one of the girls, really demonstrating or resonating and telling stories of that the ocean starts at the mountain, and the fact that all water cycles, we're all part of nature, that it passes through all of our lives. Potentially the same water droplet is, circulating around and has touched all of us. And I like to think that we all have input into the story that's being told and the ocean that is humanity. It's got to come through, it's got to come from the top of the mountain, and it has the opportunity to infiltrate everywhere. But we need to be careful that we're not eroding our topsoil and washing away and acidifying the oceans and all of those types of things. And I'm conscious that we probably don't have an enormous amount of time for questions. I was thinking of reading my poem, but you can always check in with Rosie Ravelston Books to get a copy of the lovely collection of poems, stories, and artworks. But I would really like to initiate, in a way, sort of some reflective questions of what motivates you? Do you know what motivates you? Do you know what motivates the people around you? And thinking about the art, the stories, the movies, the books that have inspired you. What was it about them that inspired you? And also, what fuels your appetite? I've taken up the personal challenge just in the last couple of weeks of trying to create one meal for myself out of my garden without snacking on sugary things in between. And I've really noticed how much more in touch it's put me with time and the necessity of now and planning and actually doing, to make sure that I'm observing what's happening in the garden, what I know what's going on with nature, because it is where my next meal is coming from, which is a choice. And, you know, our food choices, whilst we might not need to do that, but ethically, where is all our food coming from? So just that question around what fuels your appetite. So what puts you into action? If you can tap into that, you can become a powerhouse. We can all be a powerhouse together. And if we can get working on things that are common, yeah, the sky's the limit. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was lovely. Someone did ask if you could read your poem. Is it a very long poem? Is it a short?
It's only about probably a minute and a half, I would say.
Well, please do go ahead and read it, and we can still have about 8 to 10 minutes for Q&A before we wind up today. Melissa, would you like to stop sharing, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. So I've titled this "Lungs of the Land." Enough agriculture via degradation, fire, flood, and mass devastation. Chemicals kill galaxies beneath our feet. Wonder why our food is void and deplete. Question the value of seed sowed. Dead dirt wash away and erode. The time has come for us to remember. Passion for life, igniting that ember. Mother Earth by nature nurtures, bringing regenerative practice researchers. Forests are the lungs of the land, cleansing air, water, and deposit the sand. Organic matter nourish the soil. Underground communities microbes toil. Relationships create earth sponges. Sequestration of carbon it plunges. Resilient she is, but needs us now to slow down and relearn how. What desire sits deep in your heart? Loved ones, passions, your art? Your actions of now into future millennia, do they support generations of mania? Mother Nature will eventually win, the real question being the team you are in.
Thank you very much, Melissa.
Thank you for that opportunity, everybody, to share this space.
Very thought-provoking. So there haven't been a lot of questions, but there's been a lot of appreciation, people saying thank you, and this is wonderful. Someone has asked, oh, that's a separate question altogether. Well, I often say, do the panelists have questions for each other? Because often what happens when you're all together talking, it's possibly been a while and you realize you want to chat with each other about some part of your process. Or do you have any questions for each other? Otherwise, my big question is always, what's next? You've been sharing remarkable works with us, and what are you guys up to next up on the beautiful Blue Mountains? Barbara, shall we start with you?
Myself? Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the next project that I've got as part of the Regenesis work is with Janelle Randall-Court that we talked about in that interview.
Yeah.
We got some funding from Wentworth Health, and it was about, you know, helping people cope with the bushfires, actually. So this money's been running along now for 12 months, and Janelle's got a few health problems at the moment that we've had to defer it, but we're hoping to hold a workshop at the Planetary Health Initiative offices and working with Liz Bastian. And we were going to combine Janelle's work about caring for country through thinking about waste differently, and then get Liz to talk about the Planetary Health Initiative, and then bring everybody together. And we were going to invite a whole bunch of creative thinkers and artists to that workshop and say, okay, now let's create our own Regenesis journey. Because each of us, you know, as Melissa was saying, each of us, it's different because we're coming from different places. We have different things that inspire us. But we're all on this journey now. I think particularly, well, there's a big journey Australia's on, but a big journey the Earth is on, really, as we deal with climate change and the ecological crisis. And then particularly, I think, here in Australia, the whole decolonisation movement, you know, about in the slightly more than 200 years of white settlement and then different waves of immigration since. we've actually caused a lot of destruction to the land, but much more the destruction to Aboriginal people, their psyches. That the violence of colonisation wasn't just physical. It wasn't just people being chained to trees. It was also epistemic. It was a denial of the truth and validity of their knowledge and culture. And there's a lot of First Nations people now that are the new leaders who are able to speak because they've graduated from our universities, but they've got links back to their own culture, and they're providing this bridge of thinking that I think is the basis upon which we can build the Regenesis journey.
Thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're trying to do in that workshop as my next project. I don't know about the rest of you. What are you up to?
Thanks, Barbara. Henrik, did you have any thoughts on what you're doing next?
Gosh, am I on?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep. Lots and lots of commissions waiting to be fulfilled, but that might be pushed aside in order to finish our big veggie patch. That's about it. We've been sort of psyching ourselves up for years now. The framework's done. We just need to clad it so bloody possums don't get all our produce. And yeah, that's as exciting as sculpture.
Absolutely, you're sculpting with the living world. Karen has asked, can we hear more about your workshops, please?
Look, I started my life in Australia as a woodworker. Then the metal took over, and eventually I moved into full-time art practice. I've got a magnificent metalworking workshop, which means that I'm practically totally independent from other trades. I can do everything at my own place, which is mind-boggling comfort. And just recently, I built a woodworking workshop, which means I'm getting back into woodworking. Is a different frame of mind. You've got to be much more careful, much more precise, much more relaxed, because if you stuff up a joint, you have to chuck the piece away. While with welding, you can cut it up again, then re-weld it. Any of us is welcome to come and visit and have a tour.
Thank you, Henrik. I think there's some interested folks. And do you ever run classes? I'm not sure if that person asking about workshops meant, do you teach classes?
I'm sorry. Yeah. Not really. The insurance issues are so scary that I'm really not taking the risk. And it's, I used to run blacksmithing classes in Katoomba, but we had to shut down because the premiums went through the roof, and which is a shame, because
it is
I enjoy
a sad story since the 90s, the change in the insurance industry killing community activity.
Absolutely. So yeah, sorry, the answer is no.
But perhaps if folks are interested, you could contact Henrik and at least visit his workshop and have a look at what he's up to. That would
look, one-on-one, I'm quite happy to do it, but not groups, because then it's so easy to lose control of what's happening. And metalworking workshops can be dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah, and just to come in there, for those of you who want to visit Dargan, it's over near Lithgow, and there's a lovely cafe on site. So you can visit the art gallery, you can
and Met Gallery.
And then Henrik's place is right next door, where he's got this fabulous sculpture garden as well. So if you want to indulge in sculpture, get in touch with him and arrange a visit.
You would be most welcome.
Sounds wonderful. And Melissa, what are you up to next, do you think, or what's exciting you?
Well, I hate to say, and not the original, but echoing a little bit of what Barbara and Henrik have both said. It's just, I've recently become a member of the Blue Mountains Creative Arts Network, so getting more involved there with exhibitions and things going on, as well as planting my garden. Spring is here. We're well into it, and I'm way behind schedule.
Yes.
So I've got 2 new garden beds that I really do want to plant up, and be producing some salads and things for summer.
Wonderful. I can hear the pressure to get out there. And I have to say, as someone in Brisbane, I've got to do a lot of weeding. And if I don't get it done in the next month, it's going to get too hot after about 5 a.m. So the garden is calling all of us. But look, this has been a really wonderful session, very inspiring. And it's always from the Australian Earth Laws Alliance's perspective, connecting with creatives and people who are trying to use a whole range of media or ways of challenging and helping us to think about stuff is always really fantastic. Barbara, thank you for your beautiful vision and the work that you're doing to bring people together to structure up that unstructured creative work. And Henrik, your sculptures are absolutely beautiful. And Melissa, thank you also for your inspiring work. You say that you're a hobbyist, but I think you're much more than that. And thank you to our 2 recorded speakers too. We're sorry they couldn't join us, but they can watch this recording so they can see how it all came together in the end. But Barbara, unless you have anything else you'd like to promote.
I'd just like to thank you, Michelle, for everything you do. I mean, you're the true powerhouse in this place of making everything happen. So all support to you, and whatever we can do to help you with what your work is and spread the message and involve other people, we're here for you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Well, I'm really excited that you talk about green prints, and I really hope that we can connect the Blue Mountains communities into that wonderful growing space and interconnected communities around Australia over time and when the time is right. All right. Well, that's been very lovely. And thank you to all of you for joining us as participants. I think I should just do one quick plug. So do check out both the Australian Earth Laws Alliance website. If you go to earthlaws.org.au, you'll see a little button for Earth Laws Month. You can see the program, all of our events, other than some that have Indigenous speakers where we do charge to ensure that there's an income for folks and their time. But the rest, many of them are free, and we'd love you to join us. And also, I'm just going to paste one more last time in the chat. Yeah, I'm just copying. James mentioned that the nothing that Sean O'Keefe talked about is on the Earth Arts Virtual Gallery. Pretty much from tomorrow onwards, we're going to be really promoting our virtual gallery, just so you can have a look at it. And a whole bunch of other artists are going to have some materials up by early next week, ahead of time, to be promoting our Earthwords and Artlings anthology. And the anthology is a collection of poems and stories and photos and other images from people around our Earth Arts network. So please do check all of that out. Check out our program, stay connected. And if you're not on the ALA mailing list, please consider doing so. That would be lovely. And may I wish everyone a lovely day, and our friends up in the Blue Mountains, get out there and do some gardening before it gets too damn hot. Have a great time. And thank you again.
Cold here.
Oh, I'm envious. It's starting to warm up here.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Michelle. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See you soon.